Hello and welcome to Money Trail with me, Amir Arfa. Today, China overtakes the United States as the world's top trading partner. According to International Monetary Fund data called from some 180 countries, in just 5 years, China has surpassed the United States as a trading partner for much of the world, including U.S. allies such as South Korea and Australia. As recently as 2006, the U.S. was the largest trading partner for some 127 countries versus just 70 for China. But the two have clearly traded places. 124 countries for China, 76 for the U.S. China is well on its way to becoming a formidable global power. The size of its economy has quadrupled since the launch of market reforms in the late 1970s, and by some estimates will double again over the next decade. It has become one of the world's major manufacturing centers and consumes roughly a third of the global supply of iron, steel, and coal. It has accumulated massive foreign reserves, well over $1 trillion. China's military spending has increased at an inflation-adjusted rate of over 18% a year, and its diplomacy has extended its reach not just in Asia, but also in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. Indeed, whereas the Soviet Union rivaled the United States as a military competitor only, China is emerging as both a military and an economic rival, heralding a profound shift in the distribution of global power. In terms of economic weight, for example, China will surpass the United States as the largest state in the global system sometime around 2020. The story of America's decline is an interesting one full of invaluable lessons for all those interested in history, especially history of empires. From the world's top producer to the world's top consumer, from real productive economy to Wall Street's financial engineering.
The USA has kiboshed its own future, and it's not just a disaster, but it's something vicious and nasty is coming down the pike for the American people. Yes, China will be overtaking the USA within 4 years. The Chinese economy has actually grown 17 times since 1980. But the key to understanding this shift, this great economic shift in economic power from the USA across to China, really lies in the loss, or rather the export, of 56,000 manufacturing businesses in the last 10 years. Now, these are US corporations which have decided that, oh, we can get our product made half or a quarter of the price if we go to China. And therefore, we can import our goods at a much lower price. Isn't that wonderful? But that breaches the fundamental true free market rule, which is that producers and consumers must be the same people.
It's totally disgusting. I encountered this when I was in Harvard Business School as a student in the 1970s, and there were people writing business articles saying that this would be the great future for America, that we would not need any manufacturing, we could be a nation of shopkeepers and put together financial deals. And I thought it was idiotic at that time, and I think it's even more idiotic today. Every country needs to have manufacturing capabilities. That doesn't mean that you have to have all your factories in your own country. I used to work for Singer Sewing Machine Company, and we built factories in many countries around the world. That's fine too, as long as you're not closing them in your own country.
Those 56,000 manufacturing enterprises represent about 8 million good jobs. And if I have a job and I spend my money into the economy, that is known to create roughly 4 to 5 other jobs. So you're looking at somewhere between 32 million and 42 million jobs have been lost to the American economy and are not coming back.
In the most abrupt global shift of its kind since World War II, the trend is changing the way people live and do business from Africa to Arizona, as farmers plant more soybeans to sell to China and students sign up to learn Mandarin. The findings show how fast China has ascended to challenge America's century-old status as a globe's dominant trader, a change that is gradually translating into political influence. They highlight how pervasive China's impact has been, spreading from neighboring Asia to Africa and now emerging in Latin America, the U.S. backyard. China's share of the world output and trade is expected to keep rising, with growth forecast at up to 8% a year over the next decade, far above U.S. and European levels. If the trend continues, China will push past the U.S., a remarkable feat for a country so poor 30 years ago that the average person had never talked on a telephone.
Well, countries are moving away from accommodating the U.S. Economically. If you look at Japan and China, that's probably the starkest example. The U.S. was Japan's biggest trading partner for decades, but now it's China and Japan. And it's even more interesting if you look at the political conflicts and historical conflicts between Japan and China. Although they are disputing over those islands, they can't help but work with each other economically. So that creates a kind of a contradiction. But that's the future. Other Asian countries are doing similar things. Recently, there was a summit of Southeast Asian countries in Cambodia, and they signed a new agreement to work more closely together economically, and these includes all the major Asian economies, and also Australia and New Zealand. Obama showed up, interestingly enough, but he wasn't included in the final agreement. So, you know, that's the kind of rebuff that is highly humiliating, and yet it was not reported in the U.S. at all.
From 2000 to 2008, China's imports grew 403% and exports 474%, driven in part by its entrance into World Trade Organization and its move to higher value production. China's imports of oil and raw materials for its factories propelled resource booms in parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, as demand for steel for manufacturing and construction grew so fast that its mills now consume half the world's output of iron ore. Zambia, a major copper producer, switched to the China column back in 2000. Australia, coal and iron ore exporter, followed in 2005. Chile, another copper supplier, moved in 2009.
The Western countries have built more than 30,000 factories in China. Factories need raw materials from wherever in the world they can find them, and so they become the customers for raw materials. The Chinese have been very successfully buying or leasing raw material properties around the world. They didn't have to have any soldiers die in battle to secure those contracts. And so from that standpoint, the Chinese have been doing very well.
Exports surged as Apple, Samsung, Nokia, and other electronics giants shifted final assembly to China. Shipments of mobile phones, flat-screen TVs, and personal computers have jumped sevenfold over the past decade to nearly $500 billion.
China has not only gained the jobs, it has gained the technology. And it deliberately starts by replicating and then getting licenses to manufacture. And from that base, it has built up magnificently its own productive capacity. The image of China as full of sweatshops, to some extent, and there's a lot of truth in that. There are a lot of people in China who still need work. But a great new industrial power is coming into being because it's made a deliberate policy to use its own money supply to develop its own industry for the benefit of its own economy. It could do things better, it could spread the ownership more widely for a start. But it does not have this idea of Western, quote, free market, quote, capitalism, which thinks that the whole thing is really about finance. China understands that producers and consumers have to be within the same economy, and that you export your jobs and you've absolutely had it.
What goes up will eventually come down. That's been one of the indomitable rules of nature ever since the Big Bang, 14 billion years ago, long before humans discovered gravity, or even before humans ever existed. But when empires come down, there are those analyzing the decline. Exactly why did America fail?
Let's backtrack to see how this all happened. It happened with globalism and so-called free trade. Now, the main objective of globalism and free trade is to maximize profits for business. And this means that you need to minimize the cost of labor. And so U.S. companies start moving to China because that's where you find the cheapest labor. So with globalism and free trade, let's look at who benefits, who's been benefiting. So U.S. companies have benefited greatly. So although the American workers have suffered because there are no more factory jobs, no more manufacturing jobs in USA, American companies have increased their profits by moving to China. So China also benefits because Chinese workers have found jobs and the Chinese state have benefited.
The United States of corporations, how a rising corporatocracy contributed to the decline of the United States.
The huge corporations do not serve the economy. And that's the great lie which sort of infects all the thinking. They only serve a narrow group of shareholders.
So why did American companies do this? Why did they, do something that hurt their own economy and their own nation? Well, the fact is these countries are not loyal to any country. All they care about is to make money. And, the environment, their own economy, the world economy at large, none of that matters. So to chase after immediate profit, they have, in a sense, destroyed America. And they're still doing it now. And since they have bought up all the American politicians, this deliberate destruction of the United States has been facilitated by Washington, D.C. itself. So, of course, the American economy is collapsing. Of course, the American workers are hurting. In the last 10 years, roughly 50,000 American factories have shut down. So there is no recovery in the United States, and this is all done deliberately.
The next step in China's trade evolution is to move beyond exporting TVs and lawn furniture to selling services and investing abroad. The investment trend started with state-owned companies that bought stakes in foreign mines and oil fields. Smaller and private Chinese companies followed, acquiring foreign enterprises to gain a bigger foothold in overseas markets, more access to resources, and better technology for their own development. China is now pushing into construction and engineering, where U.S. and European companies have long dominated. In Algeria, Chinese state-owned companies pushed aside established French and German rivals to win contracts to build a $12 billion cross-country highway and a $1.3 billion Great Mosque of Algeria. The Chinese have also built highways, dams, and other projects in developing countries and are starting to win contracts in the U.S. and Europe. Chinese companies are starting to win government contracts in Kenya, which has ports that offer access to landlocked Uganda, South Sudan, and Rwanda. The story of the Chinese dragon and the American eagle and their quest for power and wealth on a global scale is an interesting one. Well, on the one hand, China is the biggest holder of U.S. debt, Washington's top creditor, over $1 trillion in U.S. treasuries alone. On the other hand, U.S. sees China as a threat and calls it a currency manipulator. This as the U.S. happens to be the top purchaser of Chinese goods. And China, of course, helping the United States keep its dollar afloat.
It does seem very paradoxical that, that China is basically financing the U.S. Aggression, including against China. China is already cutting back on its, is buying a U.S. treasuries. So that's is already showing sign of slowing down, if not ending soon. So because it cannot continue forever. China cannot give money to the U.S. to basically attack everyone, including China.
It's certainly true that American politicians have felt it necessary to claim that the Chinese are manipulating their currency over time. But it's also true, as you noted, that the Chinese have been willing to hold giant amounts of debt in U.S. dollars. Unfortunately for America, we've been able to get away with this nonsense of being able to borrow around the world in U.S. dollars. Other countries have to borrow in the currency of wherever they're getting the loan from and have to pay it back there and worry about foreign exchange rates. It's like we're borrowing ice cubes, and when we give it back, it's melted, and we give back less, and the people holding it are willing to take the loss. America could be brought back on track really quickly if we had to borrow in other currencies other than U.S. dollars.
The dollar or the empire? Which one's falling faster? And how long can the U.S. maintain the status quo of dollar as a global reserve currency?
At some stage in the future, it's going to come quite soon, and it could be very sudden, the US dollar will collapse. And when that happens, you'll get an immediately slashing of American military expenditure, which is half the world's total at the moment, and it'd be a good thing too. The Americans have got no reason to be all the way around the world, in fact bullying people and threatening them all the time. They should withdraw to the USA and concern themselves only with the defense of the USA.
Well, it's inevitable that's going to happen, because it won't be just China doing it. Everyone else would start to do it, because they can see that the future economy, the future global economy won't rest on the supremacy of the United States. The United States will decline not just militarily, economically. It will lose its political leverage worldwide. And so every country can predict what's going to happen in not too far from now, that they will move away from dependence on the USA and on the US dollar.
We have petrodollar warfare going on, that we want to be able to buy all the oil in the world we can using funny money US dollars instead of gold or hard currency. And more countries are now becoming smart to that and saying, we're not going to eat those losses anymore. We want to see hard currencies.
The U.S. Economic might is contingent on its military might. The U.S. has 1,000 military bases overseas, outside of its own territory. China has none, so that's a huge difference. And American liberals, American progressives always complain about U.S. militarism, but they too are benefiting from U.S. military might. And those 1,000 bases don't just benefit U.S. war profiteers. It also props up the U.S. dollar. The U.S. economic might is strictly contingent on the survival of the petrodollar. These countries have to accumulate so many dollars so they can buy oil. Okay, so if the U.S. dollar goes down, if people stop needing to accumulate so many dollars to buy oil, then the U.S. economy will collapse overnight.
The collapse of the dollar will have absolutely dire consequences on a nation where there's already 47 million people on food stamps, where the consumer credit is rising as people desperately try to compensate for the loss of their jobs, that if they've got equity in their houses, they're taking out more loans on their houses. And within the USA, all of this is now in the early stages of a military type of fascist state.
The question of China replacing the United States as the world's top economic power is not one of if, not even when. The question is whether or not China will change the world's current world order. The rise of China will undoubtedly be one of the great dramas of the 21st century. China's extraordinary economic growth and active diplomacy are already transforming East Asia, and future decades will see even greater increases in Chinese power and influence. But exactly how this drama will play out is an open question. Will China overthrow the existing order or become part of it? And what, if anything, can the United States do to maintain its position as China rises?
Unfortunately, the New World Order is working extremely well at the moment. Even the Chinese have been playing along. I mean, why didn't the Chinese veto any plans to attack Libya, for example? They had thousands of Chinese workers working in Libya and large investments that they lost. They kept their mouths shut when they should have done otherwise. All we have to do is watch what the West has been doing to Iran for the textbook examples. SWIFT, for example, the bank transfers. WTO, it took more than a decade of application efforts by China and Russia to get in the club, and they're willing to do anything to stay in the club, when in fact what they should be doing is starting a new club of their own instead of playing along with this.
Some observers believe that the American era is coming to an end, as the Western-oriented world order is replaced by one increasingly dominated by the East. The historian Neil Ferguson has written that a bloody 20th century witnessed the descent of the West and a reorientation of the world toward the East. Realists go on to note that as China gets more powerful and the United States' position erodes, two things are likely to happen. China will try to use its growing influence to reshape the rules and institutions of the international system to better serve its interests in other states in the system. Especially the declining hegemon will start to see China as a growing security threat. The results of these developments, they predict, will be tension, distrust, and conflict.
The USA, old paradigm thinking, actually perceives China now as a threat. It sees it as a threat because it recognizes it's not a sweatshop economy. It's now essentially starting to build up with war with China. That's the USA, because you see the type of finance capitalism which it represents throughout the world actually ends up always fighting people. If it occupies another economy, rips it out, it demands that there should be no capital controls, so that any one time it can smash the exchange rate and buy things cheaply.
These moments are fraught with danger. When a state occupies a commanding position in the international system, neither it nor weaker states have an incentive to change the existing order. But when the power of a challenger state grows and the power of the leading state weakens, a strategic rivalry ensues and conflict, perhaps leading to war, becomes likely.
Well, China continues to grow militarily, and it's already rattled sabers with Japan and Philippines, its own aircraft carriers now. The Chinese have a very powerful military that is very anti-American, and the day that they become strong enough, we'll be very happy to take us on in more places in Southeast Asia.
If China continues its impressive economic growth over the next few decades, the realist scholar John Mearsheimer has written, the United States and China are likely to engage in an intense security competition with considerable potential for war.
America has revealed aggression in its relations, in particular its future relations towards China. It's openly saying that the Chinese are a threat. By that they mean a military threat. Now at some point the Chinese are going to have to probably choose. And since by the time when they do choose, they will have built up such a remarkable amount in their gold holdings, that when it comes to throwing away the US Treasury bonds, well, it won't be the end of the world for China, though it probably will be the end of the economic world for the USA.
The world is changing. Stone by stone, brick by brick, there's a tectonic shift of power and wealth from west to east. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the rising powers to be. And the United States, of course, in decline. That according to all the 16 intelligence agencies of the United States, putting together a report called Global Trends 2025. The international system as constructed following the Second World War will be almost unrecognizable by 2025 owing to the rise of emerging powers, a globalizing economy, and historic transfer of relative wealth and economic power from west to east, and the growing influence of non-state actors. By 2025, the international system will be a global multipolar one.
The economic shift is leading to a political shift. And this idea that the USA can go round and kick everybody, put sand into the face of all the weaklings in the world, that's gone. And you are moving from a unipolar world right to a multipolar world, where essentially there's going to be regional groupings, and people are going to have to cooperate within their regions, and then the regions cooperate with each other. That is actually going on now within the non-aligned movement. That's how it's building. And the USA is going to have to watch out, because you see, it thinks it controls the world financial system at this moment. It thinks it controls all the thinking. It thinks it controls everything military. It is pretty strong on the military, but believe you me, everybody else is starting to say, well, we're fed up with this bullying and we're going to do things our own way. You won't see it happening suddenly. Nothing will happen, little moves, and suddenly, woof, the whole world will have changed from a unipolar to a multipolar.
Well, thank you for watching. Always follow the money trail with me, Amir Arfa.